Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my Total War Warhammer Legendary Lord lore video on Ariel, Queen of the Wood Elves. For those of you who may have seen my Missing Legendary Lords video for the Wood Elves, this is essentially a re-edited version of Ariel's story from that video. So if you've seen that video already, maybe not bother watching this one, wait for another Legendary Lore video. This one was because the Ariel history was so large, I thought I'd edit it out to be lore video on its own. Thanks very much. Ariel, the Queen of the Wood Elves, one of the most surprising omissions from the initial Wood Elf DLC. I genuinely thought we were going to see her, because her as a character really ties into the entire Wood Elf culture and mythos and history. And so we're going to cover her and go over what she's about and sort of how she came to be and where she stands in current Warhammer fiction. So Ariel is the avatar of Isha. Now Isha is the elven goddess of nature, and by an avatar it essentially means that the goddess kind of inhabits Ariel's body, and some of the features of the goddess are shown in Ariel's physical form, much like Orion is the avatar of Kronos, and that gives him sort of the hoof deer-like feet and other features like that. In terms of her appearance, Ariel looks like a normal elf from her day-to-day, but when any enemies of the forest, any enemies enter Athel Loren, she takes on her war aspect, in which case she grows to twice the height of a normal elf. She sprouts wings, moth-like wings that are iridescently colored and are sort of shifting hues and shapes, and different patterns emerge depending on the mood of Ariel at the time. It's said that when she's truly enraged, a pattern similar to that of a death head's moth appears on her wings. And normally when she is just walking about, she glows with this inner light. She's so powerful with magic. She's one of the most powerful magic users in the old world. That magic is literally sort of pouring off her in the form of glittering lights and sparkles. That's just raw magic energy pouring from the woman herself. Now, to get into a bit of Ariel's history, she was not always the avatar of Isha. She was not born this way. She did not come into the world this way. Originally, Ariel was an elven colonist. Before the Great War between the dwarves and the elves, known as the War of the Beard, the elves had colonized much of what is now Bretonnia, and even so far as into the Empire, I think, as well, to a certain extent. Now, during the events of the Elven Civil War, where the son of the king, Malekith, who would soon become leader of the tribe known as the Dark Elves, rebelled against the Phoenix Council and the Phoenix King, they split the elves in two. And when this happened, Malekith went away and plotted to have because he couldn't defeat the elves by himself, he plotted to have the dwarves and the elves fight a war against one another. This went on, and the dwarves, for the most part, managed to drive the elves from the old world. So from the Empire, from Bretonnia, they managed to drive them off the continent. This is except for the elves, who'd made their home sort of in and around the forest of Athel Loren. They wanted to take no part in the Civil War, and when the order came for the Phoenix King to abandon the old world, they simply ignored it and decided to stay in the forest. Now, at some point, the dwarves decided to try and march on Athel Loren to maybe take advantage of all the wood it had there, chop down the trees to fire their furnaces, but also maybe just hunting down any remaining elves. Now, the forest spirits at the time had not made themselves known, so we're looking at Durfu, and there were two other sort of major treeman elders, which was Coeddil and Adanhu. And these guys were just made the decision, we'll not make ourselves known to the elves. They can live in and around the forest, but they won't know there are living sort of trees like us who wander around and can take action. We'll just keep them oblivious to that fact. So when the dwarves initially marched into Athel Loren, Durfu faced them. As you know, maybe from Durfu history, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but Durfu got badly injured, and that's sort of how I think he got his scar on his face. And he had to retreat, and the forest spirits, knowing that they can't defeat the dwarves by themselves, started to shift the forest around, so that when the dwarves were marching through Athel Loren, they essentially sent the dwarves straight into the elven colonists. And the elven colonists, thinking they were under attack from the dwarves, who obviously they were just sort of having a war with, decided to retaliate. And so the forest spirits did all they could to help the elves during this battle, sort of shifting the woods. If the elves needed to retreat, they'd shift the woods so that they'd manage to cover sort of seemingly impossible distances, and the dwarves would be held back and get lost in the forest. And eventually that army of dwarves was defeated by the elves. And the forest spirits decided to say, okay, let's let them live in Athelloren. We'll protect them. We'll sort of shift the forest around to sort of provide a barrier for any other dwarves looking to hunt them down. And in turn, we'll use them to protect us, all the while staying hidden. So a time comes when young elven colonist Ariel, she'd already been a powerful mage for a long time. In fact, the elves had learned the art of tree singing. She was the first tree singer, which is a method of talking to trees. But one must understand that sort of being able to talk to a normal tree is not the same as knowing that there are forest spirits around. So she taught everyone else the art of tree singing, and thus was born sort of the tree singer mages, and they are all sort of former passed down students of Ariel. During a time that we're talking about now, this is around 2,000 years before Sigmar, around 4,500 years before current Warhammer time, the dwarves had raised another huge army with dwarves coming in from many Carracks, gathering a huge horde. And at the same time, to the west of Athelloren, there was a huge goblin and orc horde amassing as well. The elves and Athelloren were caught in the middle of these two, they were warring factions, but they were both after sort of the riches of Athelloren as well as trying to defeat each other. So the elves met in what at the time was called the Great Council. Now in the Great Council, you have Ariel, this already powerful elven mage, but still at this point a normal elf. And she's known as the most beautiful elf in the sort of woodland realm. She meets at the council, and at this council, she meets another elf, a chap called Orion. He's very sort of strapping and known as the sort of best warrior amongst the elven people. And they sort of make eye contact across this great council, which is really trying to decide on how best to go to war. At this council, Adinhu appears and reveals the existence of the forest spirits and the tree men. And he says to them, look, we know you guys can't defeat these armies by yourself. We can help. You will have the aid of the tree men, the dryad, and the treekin, and we will all help you defeat these enemies if you help us protect Athelloren. And the elves are delighted. They're like, oh, wow, some reinforcements. This is amazing. We're going to completely thrash these guys. But the tree spirits said, okay, but it will come at a great cost, and which we'll claim later. And you have to do this before winter comes in, because once winter comes in, we all go to sleep. So we won't be able to help you in winter. And the elves are like, okay, we can handle this. So they gather together their army. But at this point in the council, sort of the forest spirits have made themselves known. But in the hubbub, Ariel and Orion have gone missing. No one knows where they've snuck off to. Not too much made of it. They're sort of searched for, but not a major effort because they have higher priorities. They're going to war. The Wood Elves get their armies together, meet up with all the forest spirits, and march on the dwarves as the first army they march on. Now, with the help of the forest kin, they completely annihilate the dwarven army that's marching on Athelloren. Now, at this point, they try to turn around and face off against the goblin hordes. And they do have some initial skirmishes with the goblin hordes, but it just takes them much longer than they expected to annihilate the goblin hordes. And winter sets in. So the forest spirits start to slow down. Then eventually they start to become completely non-functioning altogether. And at this point, the elves are still having to fight this battle essentially by themselves because it's winter. The forest spirits have gone to sleep. They're not getting any help. And this goblin horde was huge. They couldn't account for the numbers and they were just being overwhelmed. So it gets to the point where the elves are fought back all the way to the Oak of Ages. And they're making their last stand. This is it for the remaining woodland elves. And as their last stand comes in, essentially, they're at the last tether. They're losing this deciding battle. And from the Oak of Ages, the sort of spirit, if you will, of their hunting god, Kurnos, appears towering over the battlefield and just starts annihilating the goblins. Like, this is essentially a giant spirit just smashing down, completely like terrifying the goblin hordes. That rallies the rest of the elven troops. They go, and with the help of Kurnos, they finally defeat the goblin and orc horde. Now, at this point, Kurnos sort of seems to turn around and march back to the Oak of Ages and sort of disappears into the tree. And the elves all start to gather around the Oak of Ages to try and understand what just happened. And the Oak of Ages begins to open up. And revealed within the Oak of Ages are sitting on their thrones Orion, who is now the avatar of Kurnos, and Ariel, the newly formed avatar of Isha, the elven gods of nature. and thus are crowned the king and queen of Athelloren. Following this, there's a stage of relative peace. The Wood Elves sort of go about their business looking after the forest during winter periods when the treekin can't protect it themselves, and likewise the treekin in the forest itself protects the Wood Elves from any of their enemies and giving them fantastic advantage. When Ariel becomes the avatar of Isha, she starts to tap into this force which plays a part, very sort of long part in Ariel's story. It's a force called the Weave. Now, it's a bit hard to describe, but I think it's essentially sort of a magic connection between all living things in the world, especially sort of forests and living things, that she can kind of feel within herself. She can read the Weave, and it allows her to know things that she wouldn't otherwise know, and to sense things going on around the entire world, and to get a sense of the purity of the world as well, and see and make sure there's no sort of dark forces or corruption, particularly sort of chaos corruption, affecting the world as it stands. Now, this piece lasts around, I think, about 1,000 years to about the year -1000 by the imperial calendar. At this point, Ariel begins to sense well, for lack of a better term that people will get, kind of a disturbance in the force, as it were, a corruption in the Weave. And she feels it's a very powerful one, and she needs to seek this out before, because as far as she's concerned, this threatens the entirety of sort of life, of nature as it stands at the moment. And so she takes to wing, she flies out of Athelloren in search of this horrible thing, and she thinks it might be a sort of chaos demon or a chaos god even. The corruption and the effect on the Weave is that drastic. To her surprise, she actually discovers the source of this corruption is what she considers a mindless beast. And it's a beastman. And it's the beastman we've come to know as Morghur, the corruptor. Essentially, just he as his being is chaos corruption sort of personified or beastified, or however you want to put it. So she's like, oh, it's a mindless beast. And in her arrogance, she just casts flame down upon him and he had gathered the beginnings of a war horde, and casts flame down upon them and flies off back to Athelloren, thinking, oh, I got worried for nothing. It was just a beastman who had a bit of power, and she flew off. Little did she know, however, that Morghur is much harder to kill than that, and is as immortal in essence as she is. So upon smiting Morghur, she returns to Athelloren, and sort of 200 years go by, and then beastmen sort of have always been a presence in Athelloren, and every year it seems that the Wood Elves have to sort of put down a beastman rising. And the realm of Athelloren is such that the elves have a multitude of theories about why beastmen keep popping up. Some of them even believe that because of the sort of weird flow of time within the forest of Athelloren, because of the weird nature of the forest itself, that they might be fighting the same beast horde over and over again, just out of sequence of time. So there's theories like that popping around, and they're just presumption us to think that this isn't a rising threat. This is just sort of beastmen, and it might be the same beastman horde, but there's one beastman horde wandering through Athelloren that we have to put down every now and then. No one's too worried about it. And essentially, what's happened is slowly by slowly, over the next sort of 200 years, the beastman horde begins to increase. And at first, they don't notice it, and then it becomes ever present, and they know. And essentially what it is Morghur, having not even realized that Ariel existed before she appeared and sort of rained fire down upon him. She'd revealed herself, and by revealing herself, she'd exposed herself not only to Morghur, but also to the chaos gods who kind of control Morghur's every action. He's not really a sentient being at this point. He just kind of goes by the will of the chaos gods. He's almost a direct channel to what they want him to do, and he just acts in their interests. And so the chaos gods realize, oh my god, this is Isha. This is one of the elven goddesses. And by elven sort of lore accounts, that a lot of the elven gods themselves had been devoured already in sort of the heavenly realm by the chaos gods. And there were a few stragglers and survivors, but for the most part, many of them had been consumed by the chaos gods. And Morghur, having seen Ariel and exposed her to the chaos gods, like, Morghur, we want you to go and devour her power. We want hers as well. So for the last 200 years, Morghur has essentially been solely focused on getting the power of Isha, of taking that from Ariel and consuming that power for the benefit of his chaos god overlords. So this beastman horde gets to huge amounts, and they march on Athelloren. At this point, they just go for it and attack Athelloren. Morghur is himself corruption personified. He turns sort of people and elves into chaos spawn on a whim. Behind him is a trail of chaos, corruption, and evil. And when he marches on Athel Loren, he spreads corruption throughout the forest to the point where even some dryads who have always been kind of malevolent spirits to begin with, maybe even join his cause or are corrupted by him, and they follow him into battle. So essentially this is a battle for the survival of Athel Loren. Now Ariel, Adenhu, Durfu, and Coeddil, the sort of three Treeman elders, and Orion of course, all team up and they put forward a front to try and defeat Morghur. And this essentially ends up in a huge battle in a field that would soon become known as the Glade of Woe. So they fight Morghur and they do manage to defeat him with thanks to a lot of Ariel's superior magic and Orion's strength. They manage to get him down. And the way he is eventually brought down is that Coeddil, one of the Treeman Elder, grabs him and Ariel blasts him with magic fire or magic energy, and he's essentially disintegrated. Now, because anything that touches Morghur is corrupted, like he's bled all over the ground, he's bled on Coeddil, like his blood has sunk into Coeddil himself, and it's just made this part of the forest a nightmare, a central like uninhabitable area. It's become a horrible place, and it's really no real sort of pure-hearted forest spirits or elves would deign to live there anymore. It's become just this horribly corrupted, seeping with chaos energy hellhole, really. But again, they think, okay, great, that's another time we've dealt with Morghur. He must be gone for good now, hasn't he? Obviously, not necessarily the case. Following the battle and the Glade of Woe, Coeddil, who always had a problem with the elves, he initially had argued when Durfu and Adenhu, the other two Treeman elders, had said, let's work with the elves, let's reveal ourselves, let's have them protect us in winter. Coeddil was always against it. Now, whether Morghur's corruption served to further affect him and turn him and corrupt his sort of purity and innocence, or whether this was just Coeddil acting out of frustration after so many years of working with the elves who he had a disdain for to begin with, Coeddil says enough is enough. These elves had brought nothing but ruin upon us. They're bad news. We need to get them out of our forest. And he begins what is known as the Great Betrayal. So he gathers, and there's a number of sort of treekin and dryads who are like, yeah, you're right, Coeddil. These elves, look at these wars we keep having to fight, and it's all the elves' fault. They keep bringing horror upon us. We need to destroy them. Coeddil raises these forces and marches. And his plan is to stop Orion being reborn. He thinks they can easily, if they can get rid of Ariel and Orion, then they'll be okay. Ariel, by the way, is not ever reborn. She's always the same person. She just goes to sleep sometimes and wakes up. But Orion needs to be a sacrifice of a Wood Elf Lord for Orion to inhabit every new spring. They move off, and he's like, okay, let's try and get rid of Orion, and that will greatly weaken the elven forces, and we'll be able to annihilate them all in winter while Orion and Ariel are asleep. Orion won't wake up, and then we can deal with Ariel by herself later on. So they wait until winter's setting, and the winter affects them as well, so they're a bit slow. They're not necessarily at their best, but they still think they have the energy to maybe take on the elves that remain if Orion and Ariel are out of the picture. So Orion goes to sleep first, or disappears, becomes incorporeal, waiting to be revived again next. But I think he actually disintegrates into ash, if I'm not mistaken. So Orion maybe disintegrates into his ash, and Ariel goes to sleep. And then Coeddil's like, okay, let's go. So they march to the Yoke of Ages and just start slaughtering all the wild riders and elf lords and elf princelings they can find to try and make that, because his theory is if we kill all of these guys, if we kill all the wild riders and the princelings, there's no one to host Orion. So either he'll come back in a weakened state or he won't come back at all, in which case we can defeat all of the elves. So they march, they start slaughtering, but what they don't realize is that as soon as the first sort of elven blood is spilt upon the soil, that Ariel is made aware of this almost instantaneously, and she raises herself in an absolute fury, and she raises hellfire down upon Coeddil and his dryads, easily defeating them almost single-handedly. This is how powerful of a mage she is, and I think Coeddil had even underestimated her power. And she rains down fire on them, and eventually she doesn't really want to kill Coeddil, because Coeddil's such an elder and such an integral part of the existence of Athelloren, and she's so intertwined with Athelloren as the forest itself, that if she were to kill Coeddil, it would be like chopping off her own arm. She couldn't handle it. It would be too painful. So what they do is they banish Coeddil to a place in the forest called the Wildwood, and they place waystones around it to stop Coeddil and the other people who had rebelled with him, the other dryads and treekin and whatever other forest spirits had rebelled with him, and they trapped them in a place called the Wildwood, and they put waystones around it to stop any of them escaping. So Coeddil's rebellion is dealt with, and this enters into what is called the Season of Revelation, which is essentially a golden age for the Wood Elves. They're doing great. They've never got on better with the forest spirits after that rebellion. All the sort of dissenting arguers had been placed in the Wildwood in their prison, and everyone's getting on like a house on fire. And then, lo and behold, Morghur rises again. You'll see there's a repeating theme in the Wood Elf history and in Ariel's history, that she's continually having to deal with Morghur and his corruption and his attempted corruption of the world, and attempting to devour her. So Morghur is reborn, and he starts an army, what is now Bretonnia, but wasn't then, was just still the Bretonnia tribe. Some human tribes were living out there, but whatever. The Wood Elves always looked down upon them, to the extent that they would actually encourage little wars between goblins, greenskins, and the Bretonnia, just to watch them fight each other for their mere amusement. That's how little they think of humankind, the Wood Elves. So Morghur rises, he's raising an army in Bretonnia somewhere, and she's aware of this, and then he starts to march north. And they're like, oh, why is he not heading in this direction? And so it appears that Morghur is heading towards a place called the Silver Spire. And Ariel's confused by this. She's like, okay, what's he planning? And then she realizes, okay, the Silver Spire is actually a source of a lot of the rivers and things that flow through Athelloren, a source of a lot of the nutrition. Maybe he's trying to corrupt the Silver Spire in order to corrupt Athelloren itself. So she's like, Orion, we need to ride out and take the fight to him at the Silver Spire. So Orion pulls together a wild hunt, charges through Bretonnia, and on his way up, he kills some humans and stuff, but they're just humans, they're in the way, he's not too bothered. So he just charges up to the Silver Spire. Orion, by the way, has a disdain for human beings, just for future reference. So they march up to the Silver Spire, and they face down Morghur, and they defeat him. They brought an army of treekin, a massive wild hunt, and they managed to defeat Morghur at the Silver Spire. Orion himself tearing Morghur limb from limb, but Morghur's corruption doesn't seem to affect Orion, so he's alright. So Morghur's dealt with, and after the battle, Orion senses a presence in the Silver Spire around the area, and he hears a whispering in his head, not unlike the whispering in his head he hears when he's being communicating with the Queen of Athelloren, with Ariel herself. But this isn't Ariel, he knows it's different. So he goes back home, he says, honey, I'm home. By the way, there's something going on up there at the Silver Spire. I'm not sure what it is. And Ariel ponders on this for a long time, and she realizes that perhaps there are actually others like her in Orion. Elven gods who have escaped the Chaos Gods and are inhabiting an avatar in the mortal realms. So she's like, okay, maybe it's another one of us, but let's not meddle too much in that. I'll be aware of it. I'll keep my eyes open. Eventually, it transpires that the voice Orion was hearing was the elven, I'm not sure it's the avatar for the elven goddess or the elven goddess herself, of Lilith. Now, Lilith, for those of you who are curious, is also what the Bretonians call the Lady of the Lake. So their goddess, who they worship to help them out, I'd recommend checking out my Green Knight video for a bit more on Lilith and how she eventually has the supplication of the entire, now what she evolved into, the kingdom of Bretonnia. So Lilith is the goddess living in the Silver Spire, or around that area. And to be fair, Ariel and Lilith become increasingly aware of each other, but tend not to mess with each other. They're not enemies, but they're not friendly either. So Orion comes back and he said, okay. And so Morghur turns up again, and again ignores Athelloren and marches towards the Silver Spire. This is several hundred years later, I believe. And okay, and so Ariel's like, okay, let's repeating the same pattern. Let's send the Wild Hunt up. But this time, when they get to the Silver Spire, they realize that the human tribes, who had always been squabbling and a source of amusement for the Wood Elves, had actually formed under a new banner, a new king, and had actually formed a kingdom. And they actually briefly met up with the Wood Elves at the Silver Spire and allied with them to defeat Morghur this time, which made the defeat of Morghur all the more it really helped them out. The Elves were like, okay, this was much easier with the help of these human tribes. And obviously, this tribe, what the humans had formed was Bretonnia under the guidance of Lilith and their champion who had united them, Guy le Breton, who is also features in my Green Knight video. So do check that one out, guys. And Ariel goes like, okay, these humans, this is actually an effective shield. If we can use this Bretonian kingdom we'll try and make them prosper, and it'll be a very effective shield. So we'll do everything we can to encourage trade, to encourage this kingdom to grow, and we'll be very friendly with them, and we'll start relations, and we'll help them get off to a good start. And they will be our shield against beastmen and other things approaching our forest. And if we make them strong, we'll just have essentially this meat shield that will save us the trouble of having to go to war all the time. And Orion understands. Orion's, as I said earlier, Orion has a disdain for human beings, but he gets it. He's like, okay, honey, I get it, but you know I'm not going to stop my wild hunts. I'm still going to go and sort of kill humans if they're in the way of the wild hunt. And she, in a very arrogant, elfish way, was like, okay, honey, it's okay if they're a little bit scared of us. You go out, you kill a few if you need to, but I won't get in your way. But for the most part, we'll try and encourage this kingdom to grow. Which is a very odd relationship to have with the humans, but there you go. At this point, this is a good time for the elves. They're communicating with Bretonnia and the outside world a bit more. They're trying to help Bretonnia thrive, to provide an effective meat shield against anything that threatens the forest of Athel Loren. And with communication lines now being open, they get word back from Ulthuan and their elven brethren from across the ocean. Now, what they realize is that the Elven Civil War is still going on these many thousands of years later. And Alisara, who is Ariel's sister, who is still technically married to Malekith, the now king and ruler of what is known as the Dark Elves. And she says, I can't believe this is still going on. How are our people still fighting? This is insane. We need to stop this madness, and I want to go to Nagaroth and talk to Malekith and talk him down from this crazy position he's taken and the way he's torn our people asunder. And Ariel rather reluctantly is like, okay, sister, if you think you can change his mind, I'll send an escort with you to the coast and you guys can get on a ship and make your way to Nagaroth so you can talk to Malekith. Now, Morghur, I think that's how you pronounce her name, forgive me I got that wrong, is Malekith's mother, and is very much plays a central part in Malekith's rebellion against the rest of the elves and the splitting of the Elven Kingdom into the Dark Elves and the High Elves. She's just a lunatic, and forgive me for the word, but a lunatic bitch. She gets wind that his wife is coming back, and she's worried that she might actually be able to talk Malekith down. Because she wants Malekith. She's the one sort of behind the scenes pushing Malekith to do all this increasingly insane stuff. And so she uses her dark magic to start to kind of seduce, kind of cast a spell upon an elven princeling called Valador. Now, Valador had recently been disgraced and lost heart, and maybe I think lost some lands or something. He was in a bad place. And he thought, and she's sort of whispering in his ear that, oh, these Wood Elves are amassing a small army to come and attack Ulthuan. They're going to attack you. They're part of the Dark Elf contingent. Obviously, she's disguised herself in this point, and then when she's getting this news to him, but she convinces him through dark magic that essentially the contingent who's Alisara's escort to the coast are Dark Elves and are coming to attack Ulthuan. So Valador puts a force together, sails across the ocean, gets to the coast of Bretonnia, sees the escort for Alisara, who's trying to make her way to Malekith, and then sort of seeing them as Dark Elves through his vision being clouded from the magic of Morghur. They attack them, they set upon them, and the Wood Elves are outnumbered, and they are slaughtered. And Valador himself catches up with Alisara, and he's about to attack her. He knocks her from her horse. He's standing over her. Alisara, being not a bad mage herself, sees the dark magic that's affecting Valador's vision and begins to chant the spell to dispel it. But before she can finish it, Valador plunges his spear through her. And as the spear sort of exits her, she manages to sort of spill the last syllables of the dispelling magic. He then is freed from the dark magic, sees what he's done, and despairs. He is so beset by himself that he immediately throws himself from the cliffs they're battling on and kills himself. The other high elf soldiers who are there retreat after this. They're all confused. They're like, were we doing a good thing? Were we doing a bad thing? They don't really know what's happened, and so they just retreat back across the ocean. As soon as Ariel hears that her sister's been murdered by this Valador guy, she falls into grief. She falls into despair, and she's inconsolable. As time passes, despair and grief give way to revenge and hatred. She starts to try and think of ways that she can punish. Valador himself is dead, but she'll punish the kingdom Valador ran, his lands, she'll raise them. The Wild Hunt will march and ruin and annihilate as it never has before. So she starts to delve into realms of magic she hasn't really explored before. Darker magics, the magics not dissimilar to the kind that Morghur practices. But through this, she manages to revive a system known as the World Roots, which are essentially something grown from the Oak of Ages. It's like the hidden beast path roots in the game, and the Wood Elves can use this. I'm sure if you've played Total War Warhammer, in the game they sort of like move about like the underground, and it's kind of like that. They travel through this root system, and they can kind of go they used to be able to go, the World Roots used to go everywhere in the world, but they'd since been shrunk down and cut during the first Chaos invasion. That was millennia ago, so that's not too important. The important thing is Ariel manages to revive part of this world root system. And once she's done that, she's able to send the Wild Hunt through the root system straight to Ulthuan. So under the ocean, re-emerging in Ulthuan, she manages to get an army there. They surprise the people of, I think it's Illyrian, which was Valador's old princedom. They ruin Illyrian. Half of it is because the Illyrians themselves also worship Kurnos, and them seeing Orion at the head of this army puts them in the doubt. They're like, what are we doing? This is our elven god. We can't harm him. So it turns into a slaughter, and even to the point where Orion's bloodlust is sated. He's like, I don't think we should be doing this anymore. At that point, Ariel's a bit confused. She's like, yeah, these seem like high elves. They seem okay-ish to me. Yes. So what was behind their actions? And she starts to uncover that there'd recently been sort of magic used upon the land, and traced it back to Morghur, the Malekith's mother, the dark elf witch. And she's like, okay, so this is the bitch that did it. Let's go get her. So the entire hunt shifts north, starts heading to Naggaroth through the world root system, and they siege Morghur's tower. I think Morghur's town, which is called Gourd. I think that's right. And she's asked Malekith for help, but Malekith either didn't care or didn't want to help his mother. And eventually the Wood Elves break down the walls, they slaughter her army, and they have her. Ariel's standing over her, Orion's next to her, they have a knife to Morghur's throat. And then now that she's seen Ariel, she's like, she can see the dark magic that Ariel's been using, and says, wait, please don't kill me, please don't kill me. I can teach you more power, more dark magic. And Orion's like, no. Orion starts raising his spear to run her through, and Ariel holds him back. She's like, wait, hold on, let's hear her out. And being seduced by the dark magic she'd already used, and she's trying to justify it to herself. She's like, I've managed to revive some of the world roots. Maybe I can revive all of the world roots. I can make the Oak of Ages spread its influence as far as it once was able to. Maybe this will help the world. And so she strikes the deal with the devil, as it were. She says, okay, you teach me all that you know of the dark arts, and I'll let you live. And so Morghur, who obviously was never going to teach her everything that she knows, but teaches her some things, strikes a deal and is left to rebuild her fortress. And Orion and Ariel eventually return back to Athelloren. Now, all the way on their return travels, even in Athelloren itself, they had arguments that could ring out throughout the forest, just loud, vast argument. Orion couldn't believe what she was doing. He was like, why are you using this dark magic? This is insane. We should have killed that witch. What are you doing? You're losing yourself, Ariel. And eventually winter comes, so Orion has to dissolve into ash and wait to be reborn in spring. Funnily, that spring, Ariel does not revive Orion. She just lets him be. And she begins to delve deeper into the darker magics. And this in itself begins to shift the feeling of things in Athel-Loren. So Athel-Loren itself becomes a much darker and gloomier place. The winters seem to last longer. Where the forest spirits and the elves once enjoyed each other's company, now dryads and elves were sort of killing each other on sight. It went from a paradise on Earth to a daily battle for survival. And the stranger thing was, to some of the treeman elders and some of the more powerful individuals in the forest, was that no one seemed to register that this shift had occurred at all. For most people, they felt like this was how it had always been. Some of the people who were immune was Durfu and Adenhu, who are the two remaining non-imprisoned treeman elders. And they're like, what is going on here? This is insane. We can't live like this. This is a nightmare. And they find some of the elves who agree with them, particularly an elf called, I think it's Neanthu, the prophetess. And she's like, hey, Elder Treeman, as you guys see what's happening here? This has become a living nightmare. We can't exist like this. Something has to be done. There's something wrong with Ariel. And they eventually they're just bemused by this. So they start to hold council and start to talk to each other and like, what is going on here? In the midst of all of this, guess who turns up again? Morghur. So Morghur turns up again, and this time, the Wood Elves ride out. They kind of have the help of some treekin that aren't trying to kill them at the time, but they ride out. They manage to defeat the war horde. But this time Ariel's like, no, don't kill Morghur. Bring him to me. I want to drain his power from him. I can use his power to, at this point she still thinks, to help the forest. And she essentially, if you realize what she's saying now, she's saying she wants to just take in an unbelievable amount of chaos corruption into herself, which would definitely see the end of the weave of the woods as it stands today, and she doesn't even realize this. So still obeying her, still true and loyal Wood Elves to Ariel their Queen, get Morghur. Now bear in mind, this had been going on for decades, if not 100 or so years, this living nightmare. And so they bring Morghur to her, and she sets up and she starts an incantation to drain Morghur of his magic and take it into herself. Now Durfu at this point is like, whoa, 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 whoa. And because the way she brought Morghur back to the Oak of Ages was that she transported him through the world routes, Durfu sensed it. So Durfu, as I said, went, whoa. Firstly, you're corrupting the world routes with this monster, this monstrosity, this horror of the world. How could you do this? The weave will suffer almost irreparably if you start doing this. How could you use our sanctified paths around the world and around the forest to move this thing? And he rushes to the Oak of Ages and just before she can finish her spell, strikes down Morghur, killing him, ruling her magic to drain his power. It's done. She can't do it anymore. She's enraged by this, and she's sort of getting ready to take down Durfu, but she thinks better of it because she realizes if she kills a Treeman Elder, even if she is the Queen of Athel-Loren, the elves may not survive a full-out war with the forest spirits, because that's what would happen if you killed one of the two remaining leaders of all the forest spirits. Then there would be war, and the elves might not win that war. So she holds her hand, but she is livid, and he can see the anger and the hatred in her heart. So Durfu's like, okay, that's the last straw. He meets with Adenhu, and he meets with Neanthu the prophetess, and they find like-minded elves and like-minded forest spirits, and they march on the Oak of Ages to try and heal Ariel. They're not trying to kill her at this point, bear in mind. They're just like, they need to try and fix her. They realize that this is madness that she's going through. They need to lift the darkness from her heart, I think they put it. They go and they get together a force, a not small, but a decent sized army, but nowhere near the forces at the call of Ariel. So they're outnumbered, and there's a battle that ensues. So they're outnumbered and they're fighting their way through, and they realize it's a losing thing, but they need to get to Ariel. And in an act of self-sacrifice, Adenhu, the Treeman Elder, is like, okay, we can't win this battle. We can't control her. We won't be able to contain her or imprison her. I have to do something drastic. So he reaches out through the weave, because the Treeman Elders can access this weave as well, through the weave, and he can sense the corruption in Ariel through the weave. And through the weave, he pulls it into himself all at once. Every sort of dark part of her magic, every part she's been corrupted by these dark forces, and he pulls it into himself. Now, this dark magic is so strong and so malevolent and so corrupt that it kills him instantaneously. He dies on the spot. He sort of rots away and dies there. And Ariel although is instantaneously cured. And almost in an instant, the forest gets a bit brighter, the sun breaks through, you can see a lightening of the whole of Athelloren. And her realizing what she had become in the instant, sort of having the veil lifted from her eyes, is beset by grief. She breaks down in tears. She's like, what have I done? The battle immediately ends. She's like, I'm sorry, my elven brethren. This has been a horrendous mistake. I've been awful. I've almost completely ruined the weave and the forest and our way of life. And she rushes into the Oak of Ages, and it seals behind her. That's where she, by law, remains to this day. So she is so beset by the terrible deeds she's done that she ran into the Oak of Ages. But that spring, Orion did rise again for the first time in many, many years. I think it's several hundred years. In fact, I think it might be close to maybe 500 years. Orion finally returns. So Orion's ruling by himself, and Ariel does not leave the Oak of Ages. She's still just like, I don't deserve to rule. I've done the most horrible things. I almost ruined Athelloren. I almost condemned the world. I can't be trusted. These stories have taken place over the course of, I think, 2 or 3 millennia, bear in mind. So these are all spread out. Morghur doesn't pitch up every week. It's every sort of 500 years or something like that. Orion's starting to rule by himself. Peace returns to Athelloren. Athelloren very much becomes similar to the way it was today. During the Dark Times, the Queen would often order raids on the Bretonnians. They'd actually become huge enemies of the Wood Elves, to the point where like Coeddil and Parabon were often sacked and burnt and were abandoned for a time because the Bretonnians were like, we can't even live that close to the wood, they'll kill us. So the Bretonnians withdrew. At some point they tried to retaliate against the Wood Elves, but because Athelloren could still shift and move against any enemies who were looking to do harm against Ariel or the forest itself, this sort of band who'd sort of marched forward to try and deal with the Wood Elves because they'd been raiding Bretonnia so much, got lost. And at the same time, the High Elves during this dark time had reached out and sent a group of ambassadors to try and apologize for the actions of Valador for killing Ariel's sister and to try and re-establish relations. Now, Ariel, again, being lost in her darkness, had actually moved and shifted the forest so that these two parties ran into each other. And the Bretonnians, not knowing a High Elf from a Wood Elf, assumed these were Wood Elves and burnt all the Wood Elf emissaries at the stake. And this is the kind of messed up stuff that Ariel was doing. So, suffice to say, she retreats into the Oak of Ages, and she's staying there seemingly forever. So this is maybe why Creative Assembly did not include her in the game, but I don't buy it. Like, let her out of the tree. You let Vlad come back from the dead. Let her out of the tree. So she sees that Orion, while she's hidden away in the tree, which is around, I think she disappears around the year of the Imperial calendar, 1702, which is again about 900 to 800 years before the current Warhammer timeline. And in that time, Orion's been ruling by himself. She sees that Orion, when he's left to his own devices, has become increasingly sort of bloodthirsty and lusting after the hunt and hunting humans and things, but not to the point that she ever was on the dark side. But Athelloren's still a very healthy and relatively happy place. But she's like, okay, he's getting a bit too aggressive all the time. I maybe need to like rein him in somehow. And she realizes at that point that what it takes to rule Athelloren is the balance between her and Orion. Not one of them can rule. They both need to rule together. So she sends out a couple of emissaries to speak on her behalf. And that's really where current things stand with Ariel. She is in the Oak of Ages. She's sent out these emissaries, but I think she should definitely come out of the tree and become a character. She's so integral to the Wood Elf lore and the Wood Elf way of life that I think she should really be included in the whole thing. In terms of her gear and what she might bring as a legendary lord to the battlefield, she has the Wand of Wickelm, I think is how you pronounce it. And what this wand does, essentially, it itself stores up magical energy. So if you're looking to cast magic without the winds of magic, this staff allows you to do it. So I think in Total War Warhammer, we'd see it so that some of her magic spells would be castable without necessarily the use of the winds of magic, much like the Sisters of the Fawn are now. So I think that's what that item might do. Another item she has are the Acorns of the Oak, which allow you to throw a seed and instantly grow a forest. So I imagine that might look something like the Waking Wood spell, but maybe a bit more permanent and maybe hold people in position, something like that. So that's what that item would do. Another thing she's known to carry around is berry wine, which is said to invigorate herself or her allies. So I assume that that would maybe be some kind of healing without the Winds of Magic as well that she could use. And her last item is the Heart of Athel Loren, which gives her protection from magic. So essentially a magic resistance buff, I think, is all that would be. But I really hope they do add Ariel soon. I think she looks great. I think they could do wonderful things with her kind of moth butterfly wings and in her enraged state. And I think it's about time we had a really, really powerful magic user. I mean, Balthazar Gelt is kind of rubbish. Kemler's kind of rubbish. So it's about time we had a really good magical legendary lord. And I think they can make Ariel that legendary lord. So I really look forward to seeing her in the game. And I really hope they add, and I can't see them not adding her because she is such an integral part of the Wood Elf lore and history. But there you go, that is Ariel. Hope you all enjoyed this video. Please do subscribe. I'll pop up a couple of other videos that may be of interest. Do like if you think I've missed anything as far as Ariel is concerned. As I say, her history is quite vast. Please do let me know in the comments. Otherwise, hope you enjoyed and do join me on the next one. Thanks very much.